Greetings, fellow soldiers, and welcome to Bitcoin Liberty Live. We're on episode 5 now, and we're cranking away here. Big news just lately for me was Portland Bitcoin Conference. Bitcoin is for everybody. It was an awesome visit. I went, you couldn't make it. I want to talk a lot about that. Before we get too far into the conference, just this morning on Robin Seyr, you were on his podcast this morning.
Yeah.
It dropped this morning. I'm halfway through it. I haven't been able to finish it because we're starting this podcast, but I'm listening to it. It's great so far. What was your experience on that podcast?
Thank you, Fritz. It was cool, man. I mean, Robin, I'm actually a big fan of his work already, so it's hard for me to keep up with his output. Like, he always has these really interesting guests, and the way he sort of presents things, and he's very, he's just an enormously productive person. And so, but every one of them I want to like watch and sit down and kind of appreciate, and then I put it on like 2x speed, and I'm just like, but then even then I still run out of time, so I can't keep up with what he's doing. So it's pretty cool for me just to be, on a podcast that I was a fan of already, and he was a really gracious guy, and he was really cool, and he's going to be in Prague, so I'll meet you out there. Mr. Seyr, it was an honor. Thank you.
I want to go to Prague. I can't. You're going though.
Yeah.
And Robin will be there. Yeah. Well, with Seyr and many others.
Oh yeah, like awesome. Eric Stacks, Lynn Alden's talking there. I think. I mean, there's going to be a truck ton of really impressive people. I mean, and I've been learning a little bit of Czech. I've been trying to learn a little bit of Czech. It's tough for me to wrap my speaker pipe out around it. But
get fluent here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Rozumím česky. Jenom trochu.
What I like about Robin, I mean, so he's got that great accent, Austrian accent. It's very smooth, totally understandable, but interesting to hear his tone of voice. He reminds me of a Jeff Booth in a way where he can say the most great things, great effect, and his tone and his energy is really steady. It's nice, steady energy.
Yeah.
So that in a conversation, it's not hyped up or drama. It's just clear signal. And the message you had, well, what was interesting, I think you may have blown his mind, I think initially, just in the first 5-10 minutes when you get into your book and talking about one of the points of that about money, and sort of the origins of money, and how you mentioned again, like in Lynn Alden's video and her book, and just a lot of people's presumptions about the Adam Smith origins of money being from an extension of barter systems and trade, and then needing a fungible, smaller, divisible piece of trade item. Makes sense, I get it. And then what you mentioned to him, which we have talked about before on this podcast, is the need for money as a method of taxation. And to be able to extract from all the people stuff that doesn't go bad in a divisible way, and somebody who provides services or time can still be taxed. When he says, I got nothing but my time, and instead of like, well, we need part of your time as a slave, just take their money.
Yeah, exactly.
When you mentioned that to him, he was like, I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't. And when the first time I heard it, it was a little bit of a stretch of a leap, like, okay, that's a different roundabout way of thinking about the origins of money. I got to think about that. I get it, but kind of when and where and how did that happen? When you mentioned it again on his podcast, it was delivered in a real simple, straightforward way that was as easy as, an extension of barter. Well, this is, an extension of extortion. It's that simple, folks.
Yeah.
And you can talk about that more if you want to, as far as how that happened or takeaways from what you said about it on the podcast.
Yeah, sure, man. I mean, like, I think for anybody watching, all 4 of you, or whatever it turns out to be, if you just think about like any extortion racket, like there's protection rackets, and if you're not familiar, it's like the local gangster comes by your store and goes, hey, there's some pretty dangerous characters around here. You should probably consider paying us a little money to make sure.
Including us, but hey.
Well, that's the unspoken thing, right? As they go, some really bad people could come in here and smash up your store, and while they're sitting there like smacking a bat on their hand or something.
We're your protection.
Yeah, so the extortion is like, pay us or we're going to come break your stuff, right? And The example I gave to Robin was like, imagine if you're the local gangster and you go around and you go like, hey, you're a sandwich maker. How about every week you give me a couple of sandwiches or else I'm going to smash up your stuff? Well, if everybody in the community was a sandwich maker, sooner or later you're going to end up with like 1,000 sandwiches. And you go, well, how am I ever supposed to eat all these damn sandwiches? This is no good to me.
Or we've got all this wheat now, and is that good for a year or 2 or 3? We got plenty of wheat here. We need something we can use ourselves.
Right. Well, I mean, what it is you have contemporaneous need and demand, right? And so if you just go to the shop owner and go, hey, I got this little thing. It's called gangster token. See? So what you need to do is you need to make sure you get enough of these gangster tokens that you can pay me your tax. And by the way, I'm going to use these gangster tokens to buy sandwiches from you once in a while. And they go, well, what if I don't use the gangster token? Well, bad things can happen. Like you're going to get wrecked.
That's a good Czech accent there.
Yeah, that's my Czech accent. Forget about it.
Forget about it.
So once you start forcing people to trade in specie, which is what a lot of those medieval rulers did, gold and silver coins, right? Not only can you tax them for their productivity, their labor, all that kind of stuff, but you can also force them to trade in specie so they can pay their tax. And then you create an economy that says, okay, now that we've collected all this tax, we're going to come and buy the stuff that we need from you when we need it, rather than trying to store up weed, leather, shoes, ox carts, whatever it is. And so it's just an extension of that theft mechanism that is really rooted in sort of brutality. It's just like they show up and go, hey, if you don't give me one of your sheep, I'm going to bash your brains in. And, but again, you can only have so many sheep before you go, man, I got to take care of these sheep. And how about I just let them keep taking care of it, and I'll just make them trade for that in money.
So whether the people needed the money themselves for trade or not, or had their own ledger or reconciled it, however, you created an economy or a market around having this specie, these items.
Well, it's sovereign denominated, right? Mm-hmm. It's and that's, they go, you must use this to pay your tax. Like, we do not accept anything but the thing that we issue. So that forces you to collect enough to pay the tax, because if you don't pay the tax, they come and kill you, right? They go, hey, you owed us some tax. And it's the same as the gangster. Hey, last week you were supposed to pay us 3 sandwiches. You didn't give us those 3 sandwiches, so it's time we got to bust your legs, right?
And you're like, hey, I just build fence. I don't have fence supplies. I go to people's places and I build fence for them with their timber. Okay, well, you can still give us the coin.
Right, you can still pay your tax. And from the sovereign perspective back in the day, like, they would go, well, you're my property. Like, I own you, right? You're on my land. I am the divine king by divine right. Everything on the land is mine. So therefore, your labor is mine. So basically, if you're doing labor for someone else, that's me renting it to someone else. So you should be paying me for that too. And
it becomes more necessary as settlements or cities or nation states become larger. Mm-hmm. The logistics of traveling around and collecting the stuff is more work for your men and troops or whatever. And so, hey, if everyone's got the coins, it's just numbers.
Right.
So.
And it makes the accountancy a lot simpler too, because like if your men are going out and you're stealing bushels of wheat or whatever, they go, oh, we only got 3 bushels of wheat. You go, wait, I'm pretty sure that guy had 4 bushels of wheat. Like, what did you do with that other wheat? Whereas if it's just money, you go, I know these people owe me this much, and if I don't get that much, then one of you guys is stealing from me, and I'm going to go kick your ass, Mm-hmm. So it makes the accountancy a lot easier, but then you end up at the same place that Adam Smith did, which is like, medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. It's just the Adam Smith version suggests it's a natural evolution. We're like, well, this is just naturally how things happen because we just naturally do this. And I go, no, it's not. It's always been a function of extortion. It's never been a thing that just naturally occurred when people freely trade with each other. It's always been a thing for someone to take from you, and that's why like Bitcoin is such a big deal, because it takes the sovereign out of that equation.
Right. You can take that responsibility and be your personal sovereign as you like.
Yeah.
I haven't finished the podcast. Are there anything else from the podcast that you took away from it that you got into that you feel like talking about or sharing from that?
Well, we solved the problem of world peace, so you should probably stick around to the end of that and make sure you get to the end of the podcast.
Does that align with your book?
Yes.
What Bitcoin does?
Yeah, exactly.
There's what Bitcoin did. There's also what Bitcoin will do.
Right. And we've actually settled the entire problem of global conflict. Between me and Robin together, we managed to solve that problem. So
Looking forward to that. Well, cool. I was super excited to hear that, one, you were just on the podcast. Two, I start listening to it this morning as I'm prepping stuff, and I'm going. It's one of those podcasts where I have to stop and grok it for a while because I'm going, yes, this is good. It's quality, clear signal. I'm enjoying it so far. So I look forward to finishing it. This past week, I was down in Portland. Didn't have to travel too far for it, but met some buddies. Great contingent of folks from around Oregon, all there. People I knew of, had met before, and also meeting a lot of new friends. It's hard to articulate for me when I'm constantly downloading content, learning, studying, plenty to do on my own for myself. And I feel like I can go watch their podcast or, oh no, I get their points. I've heard it before. I tell you, when you're just there in person, of course, as you know, if you've been to a conference, it's just such a different environment, such a different experience. You have that time where, like, hey, like there's Troy Cross right there. Well, there's Dennis Porter, and I can talk to them, or Jeff Booth, hanging out with Jeff Booth. Hey, I'll buy you a beer. Awesome, we're hanging out, and you just have that special time with someone who's special that makes it real. And the conversation and flow meanders wherever, and you make those connections in such a more real way that you remember. Definitely memory making. I can't recommend enough. If you had never been to just any conference, go. Hey, if you can get tickets to Prague coming up, go. Nashville, try it on if you hadn't been to like Miami before. We're going to Pacific Bitcoin this fall.
Yeah, he won tickets.
I won tickets. I was on the Swan halftime show during the halving, and so at the conference, I met Kristen Thompson in person, who had moderated the everything with events and promo and presence for Swan at these events. Met her in person, caught up. It's like, yeah, we were on this show together, and that was fun for that 15 minutes. And then it's something else. You see her in person, and it was just fun to connect with people who are going to be at Pacific Bitcoin, and I look forward to seeing again. And it's just so real. Wow. That was great. The opening keynote, Vijay Boyapate, I've got his book. I bought his book. He signed it. I have to brag about that. The bullish case for Bitcoin here. He signed it for me. That's always special too, numbered and to the moon. That was cool. Get to talk to him. Great keynote speech. VJ is, there was an interesting conversation that occurred after his talk about the whole ideas about the need for ossification in the Bitcoin network. I think that's where a lot of discussion is happening. I mean, it's what the development world is often about, is Michael Seyr and VJ and many others would argue that, and perhaps I would say I go back and forth about it, but ossification being just that we solidify the granite that is Bitcoin, and it's so important right now. We're not messing with it. We're not trying to improve it. Like, hey, we're learning about Bitcoin. Let's fix it. Let's make it do more differently, whatever. There's a lot to talk about in that scape, but Michael Seyr, VJ, they would say the time is to get Bitcoin ossification. Everything else can be on another layer. Work layer 2, layer 3. Get what you need out of Bitcoin on other layers. Don't try to change Bitcoin now. Ossify it. In my mind, ossification is, I think it's critical, but also we need those core developers and developers running nodes and for mining that are able to adapt to threat vectors or more of a security landscape. I think we just want to make sure it's running well, robustly, and secure as that landscape may change. That we also, there's some unknown unknowns perhaps. I think a lot of the concerns are largely known now and can be addressed on layer 2s. Do you have an opinion about ossification?
Well, I mean, what you were talking about, when we're talking ossification, I'm not sure that it's necessarily about we don't want to have security improvements, right? I don't think they're saying it should be set in stone, so it can't be changed at all. What
Sure.
I think the suggestion is like, hey, we don't want to tinker till it breaks, you know. And if you look at like, if you contrast it with Ethereum, and they go, hey, we're proof of work, and then they kowtowed to ESG concerns, and now it's a proof of stake thing, and I mean, it's a fundamental change, and it rug pulled everybody that had invested in all the mining infrastructure and stuff like that. And you go, well, hey, I mean, that it would be a huge improvement to have Bitcoin be proof of stake. You go, well, that's terrible, but that's the same line of thinking. That's the same logical premise that underpins a lot of like, hey, we need to improve, you know, like increase block size, or we need to do this so it has more transactions. And I think fundamentally speaking, like one of the things I talk about with Robin was Bitcoin enables property rights, like egalitarian zero trust access property rights. And the ability to own property that a sovereign cannot seize or capture is huge. I mean, it's such a fundamental shift in how society, how the global economy functions, that you go, well, let's tinker with it so we can buy coffee easier with Bitcoin, or we want to make it so it's so private that I could buy cocaine in Bolivia with Bitcoin. You go, those are second order sort of fiat thinking kind of things, right? You go like, hey, we need more transactions, we need better throughput, we need to make it so at some hypothetical point in the future somebody can buy fractions of a Bitcoin because that's going to be the most important. I go, you guys are missing the forest for the trees, quite literally. And enabling egalitarian property rights distributes power in such a profound way that it's really, really hard for people to contemplate what that means. So I'm very much with the Michael Saylors of the world and the VJs who are saying like, hey man, we got to be careful with what we're tinkering with here, because it's kind of the equivalent of like, hey, we need to make it so it's a lot easier to trade land. You go, yeah, I don't. They've got these rules in place for a reason. It's because they don't want people committing fraud, you know. And if you increase the surface area for fraud to occur on the Bitcoin blockchain, or the time chain, I should say, then you have created I mean, you've gapped it down to the level of fiat thinking. And once you're there, you go, well, you've just ruined any chance we've had. I mean, because I look at it as like the first opportunity in the history of mankind to distribute property rights in a egalitarian fashion. And if you mess that up, you mess up, I mean, you literally derail the first opportunity we had in the modern economy to make things better. So it's
Yeah.
something you tinker with at great risk for very low reward, you know.
I've become more pro ossification. And I have old fiat mind frame habits. Certainly, I can't help that bubble up, and then I have to remind and reframe my education on money. And I think what a lot of the argument is often about, it's about, yeah, like you said, either security, privacy, and anonymity aspects, or it's liquidity, quick money aspects.
Right.
Both of those can be solved on other layers. There are ideas around let's adjust or help Bitcoin meet some of those, privacy, security, money aspects at a core. That maybe there's ways to do it if we're smart enough and can tinker well enough. I just think it's all too important to screw with. It's running well, and the layers are where it's at. So in that regard, I'm with Seyr and VJ on that one.
Well, I'd also say like, I think the privacy thing, privacy and transactions, is a bit of a red herring, because it's like people are griping about this on a phone that is tracking everything they do.
We're tracked anyway in so many ways, and then okay, I'm using Bitcoin. So
they gave that up so long ago. Like they didn't even, without even a second thought, they've just been giving away freedom constantly. And then they're going to plant a flag here and go, this is the line in the sand where we must have, private transactions on the Bitcoin main layer. And you go, well, why are you planting a flag here? Like you guys gave all that up. You could have fixed any number of these things years and years and years ago, and you just went, I don't feel like fighting for privacy anywhere except for the one place that I feel like it should be enforced based on my vision of what Bitcoin should be, and et cetera, et cetera. And I go, man, it's such a like the notion that you're going to live in a fully connected digital society and still be able to be anonymous and buy your cocaine in Bolivia. I go, the better thing to do would be to get rid of the laws that make it illegal to buy cocaine in Bolivia. Better thing to do would be get rid of the laws that say AML is a thing. It would be, and these are all vote harder kind of things that people could do, but they don't, because they don't care. They don't think about it. They don't bother with it. They will literally tweet things on a phone that's tracking them over a network that's controlled by centralized entities, and then go down to the bank and use all that surveilled fiat money to pay for all that shit. And they don't give it a second thought. And they may, couch like couch quarterback everything and go, well, this is the way things should be. And I go, well, you haven't enforced any of that ideology anywhere else in your life except for this one area where you could absolutely monumentally screw up something that's incredibly important. So
Yeah, say you want your privacy or anonymity, and Bitcoin could be that for you, or you could vision that it's better that way for you. The layers, if you call it that, under Bitcoin, your on ramps onto Bitcoin. How many people want the privacy of Bitcoin, but they're on ramps, and your life is all KYC'd? And how hard is that to decipher? It's just it's more complicated than just being Bitcoin. Our lives are often so easily corrupted in privacy anyway. There's a developer in the Portland area, D++. She had a really good point she made in her talk. Somebody asked a good question after a panel that was like, hey, I've stacked a bunch of stats for a long time and I'd like more privacy or security. What can I do now? Throwing it out there, whether that's, tumblers and mixers and things, or ways to move it or to clean my act up now. And after some pontification about it, she said, honestly, it's all KYC'd. I mean, just accept that. You're KYC'd, you own Bitcoin. It's discoverable in ways. Even as, say, tumbling and mixing technology evolves and gets better, so does analysis and intelligence and all of that as well. And who knows what the focus of an intelligence group would be capable of trying to decipher or claiming. Who knows? Right. All they see is that you had some once, and then whether it was a boating accident or I bought some service, they can say, well, but we know you probably still have Bitcoin. And then they could just say, we probably have this much. So her point was, you don't know. It was KYC. Sure, mix it, tumble it, do different things with it. Just consider it, if you care about that, effectively compromised. And if you really want that level of privacy and security, start again from zero with a separate stack that you buy all the way through with Satoshi's vision of privacy.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother realm that it's an education rabbit hole that is another topic for another month's course. But
well, it's not rocket surgery. I mean, you go find someone to buy from OTC.
There's a lot of ways to do it.
Like, it's the easiest thing in the world. Like, you can go find a Bitcoin ATM right now. There's a guy in Kirkland, Washington, who runs a Bitcoin ATM. It was a little convenience store I used to go to a lot. And he's running a Bitcoin ATM, and he goes, yeah, I'm pretty sure that thing's just there for money laundering. He says, I'll see like little old grandmas come in carrying a stack of like $20,000 cash. And there'll be some like gangster kid outside talking to her and telling her to go in and deposit all this money and put it in Bitcoin. And, so you got grandma just sitting there KYCing herself for Junior, I guess, who knows, whoever's out in the parking lot. And, but dumping like 20 grand into Bitcoin and then sending it off to a wallet. And, if the FBI comes to talk to her and goes, hey, what'd you do with all this Bitcoin? I go, I don't even know what Bitcoin is,
Well, I don't want to throw a granny under the bus. But there's a great no KYC website. Matt Odell and others. I've seen it all over the place. There are great resources if you're interested in multiple ways to do this type of stuff. And it takes some thought. I mean, steps in that process can dox you, but so it just takes some thought.
Well, even there, it's like you are one transaction away from deniability, I guess, is the ultimate thing you can say. You go, hey, I just I went to Kraken or whatever. I don't recommend Kraken. I'd say you should go with River, Swan, or Unchained or something like that. If you're going to buy your Bitcoin, you should only buy it on a Bitcoin only exchange. Like if you're on a shitcoin exchange now with the new Fit 21 legislation pending, it's like you kind of go, well, just buy it anywhere because shitcoins are now going to be just.
Here's your ETF. Here's your ETF.
Well, it's a new gambling token, right? I mean, and it's absurd what they've done, and I kind of go, well, whatever. It doesn't really matter to me.
I'm getting my mind around what that means myself. So.
Well, it's a shit show, but we can talk about it. And,
yeah.
But the ultimate thing is if you take from your KYC exchange and they go, okay, you need to admit by ticking this box that says the address I'm sending this to is under my control. Okay, great. So you click the box and you do your little thing and you follow the travel rule if you're in the United Kingdom or whatever. And you get all your stuff off the exchange onto a wallet you control, and then you just go transfer to this wallet, please. And then the trick for the authorities is to go, what'd you do with that Bitcoin? Go, I got scammed. What do you mean you got scammed? I followed a link. This guy convinced me he was a prince from Nigeria. I sent him all my Bitcoin because he said he was going to double the amount of Bitcoin I get back in 2 months. And then I never got my Bitcoin back. They go, we think you control that Bitcoin. I go, I don't. We think you do. Well, prove it. They go, well, how are we supposed to do that? I go, that's a you problem, dude, not a me problem.
What if things get to the point in that regard, desperate government, desperate IRS, or whatever they're doing, and they say, it don't matter. We still can presume enough, and you have a great story, but we're just going to say you have it.
Well, then you run into the entire problem of the criminal justice system in the United States of America that goes, no, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, or it's an invalid thing. You can't just scoop people up and go, well, we're pretty sure that you killed that guy. Because that fundamentally alters the entire social contract of the United States of America and most of Europe that says I don't need to prove I'm innocent, you need to prove I'm guilty. And
my heart goes out to all the people that have to set that precedent in court.
Well, they're not. That's already a precedent. That's not a thing they have to prove. That's how our criminal justice system works. You go, you need to prove that I'm guilty. The way
Samurai's going through it right now.
Well, Samurai is not. And if you read their court papers, especially the ones, or maybe it was the Tornado guys, there's a ruling in the Netherlands, and people got all bent out of shape because they said, oh, they're a money transmitter and this and that. And that hasn't been tested in court yet, so I wouldn't go so far as to say they're necessarily going to get rung up for being a money transmitter. But if you facilitate money laundering, which they very clearly were bragging about doing all over the place, we're happy to help you launder your money. It's like, well, what do you expect? They're going to make an example out of you. And it's like Ross Ulbricht. You go, he just set up a website. I go, he was flaunting international drug laws like wide open. You go, they're going to try and make an example out of you, like 100% of the time. Had he not been that prolific and that sort of outspoken about it and all that kind of stuff, you go, well, would they have tried to make an example out of you? No. The bigger trouble you run into is you go, hey, I moved $25,000 from a crypto exchange to a wallet, and then I moved that, or somebody moved it after that to a new wallet address. And you go, do you control that wallet address? No. Prove that you control that wallet address. Well, good luck. How are you ever going to do that? How can I prove something that only you know? And that's the problem of hidden information, and that's true of every investigation into somebody who may be falsifying something, lying about something, anything like that. You go, there's no way to prove beneficial ownership and control absent a paper trail. So if you have a paper trail and you've got the whole thing written down and go, on May 12th, I sent all my Bitcoin to this address to hide it from the IRS. Send, and then sent that email to your friends, they can probably find that. It's discoverable. If you just did it, proving how they can prove where things went, that address is going to be controlled, but then that could be sent to another address, and then they go, well, we still think this person's in control of it. If you show up at a KYC exchange with Bitcoin from that address, yeah, you're boned. But that absolutely doesn't stop you from transferring it to another guy's wallet. And, I mean, if they're willing to take it, because you go, hey, this is subject to sanctions. If you try and cash this in at an exchange, you're going to get boned.
What about the situations where, okay, there's a lot of growing number of Bitcoiners out there doing, navigating various territories in this regard. And they don't have to prosecute you or to go after anything criminally, but they can always just audit you and make the audits annoying or harsher than they need to be. And your average person just can't deal with too much of interaction with bureaucracy or scrutiny. Could it just be sort of the pressure put on people to be like, oh, I hate dealing with this, I'm out, you know?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. If you have a complex sort of financial arrangement, then theoretically you have people to deal with that. If you're someone like a wage earner that goes, I have some property somewhere, you go, well, how bad is, like, audit my finances? You go, okay, where did this money come from? That paycheck right there. Okay, well, where's all the rest of your money? You go, well, clearly I don't have any. Like, so there's not much to audit. There's not much to harass. I mean, there you could come up with all sorts of hypotheticals, I suppose, about how the government might harass you. And I go, yeah, it's unlimited how they can harass you. They can come and take all your stuff. And the thing about most Bitcoiners that I found is, like, Bitcoiners tend to collect less stuff as a general rule. Like, once you get fully orange pilled and you're sort of down that rabbit hole, things like, hey, I want a new Bentley, start seeming less important, right? And so if you are still of the fiat mindset where you want to collect a bunch of junk, then yeah, the federal government could come in and asset seize you and take all your junk. And sooner or later, that might become annoying, 100%. The fundamental problem, though, is, like, proving beneficial ownership and control of your Bitcoin. And the thing is, it's non-jurisdictional, right? So if you go, I don't own any Bitcoin, and then you go to El Salvador and then you exchange it in El Salvador, they go, hey, we know you sold that $1.2 million worth of Bitcoin. You go, yeah, well, I'm in El Salvador. It's legal here, so go pound sand, buddy.
Well, they could make your life in America more annoying. I see in the American flag and all that here. I mean, I want America to be pro-Bitcoin. Bitcoin's good for America, and America can be good for Bitcoin. I think Americans can very well be pro-Bitcoin. I hate for people who are getting orange-pilled and learning about it to start to feel some heat or concern in an established fiat way and retreat back from that because it's just too annoying.
Well, that's the thing is what I'm saying is the inverse of that. And I think the sort of perspective you're coming at is like, yeah, well, we need to be afraid of the government. We need to do that. And I go, oh, I just don't think it's ever going to be an issue.
I guess I don't trust fiat authorities that I can't always predict.
Well, no one can. And that's, sort of the thing. Ultimately, it's like, if we're talking about the need for, like, absolute privacy in transactions, you go, well, you gave that up 20 years ago and you didn't even think about it, right? So no one raised a stink after 9/11. No one said anything about AML laws getting passed. No one said anything about KYC laws getting passed. Literally no one. They all sat there going, oh my God, terrorism. And they, shit their collective pants and just gave up all freedom overnight with nary a complaint. And so you go, now is the time we need to stand up and take our privacy back by being able to hide our Bitcoin transactions. I go, kind of that barn door has been left open, that horse done run out, and closing that door now is sort of good luck.
So as far as being a Bitcoin maxi, from your perspective, that is much less of a concern versus the general trend of money and economics that Bitcoin's changing.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's,
And I agree. I can't help but think about the detailed processes. I have some tech background and I, value people's rights to privacy and being American. And so my thought goes through it. And it's like, why do I have to even worry about this? And not that I have to, because I keep my nose clean. And at the same time, I do respect just fundamental human rights on a privacy level, and then having to wrangle with, say, the IRS around that kind of stuff. But one little point that D++ made was that if you had a KYC stack and then you start stacking separately, non-KYC and differently, keep those separate. Don't intermix. You don't transfer from one to the other or back and forth at all. Just treat it as a wholly separate island. And that was a good point. So if you're going down that path, just keep all that stuff in mind. If you're going there, it's a tightrope to navigate carefully. Now, as far as being KYC, maybe in the grand scheme, it's really not a concern as far as being any kind of bearish Bitcoin concern.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you really want to get private without having to go through any hoops. Just buy some Bitcoin and then record the transaction. Go, I sold this Bitcoin to Bob. Oh, well, you owe us tax on that. Okay, here's your tax. So yeah, you get taxed on your sats. I get it. It's kind of a pain in the ass, but now you're no longer the beneficial controller of those sats. Go,
like declare it effectively.
yeah,
And declare it as
I
having.
sold all my Bitcoin to Fritz. And I go, here's my tax that I owe for the capital gains that I got on that Bitcoin. It's 20% if you sit on it for a year. Yay. And then you can go, okay, well, I paid my income tax, and now I've exited my KYC Bitcoin land. So you may still control that wallet. And the point is regardless of how you get it, if you are being surveilled, as you suggest, like in such a deep way that they're looking at everything you do, if you suddenly turn up at an exchange and try and get your non-KYC Bitcoin out, they're going to go, hey, where'd you get all that? Like, that's what was the big blocker guy that just got rung up on tax evasion?
Roger Ver.
Well, that was his hustle. He was like, oh, well, I'm just going to hide all this Bitcoin, and then I'm going to
Yeah.
go try and cash it in somewhere else. And they went, well, wait a minute, I thought you didn't have any Bitcoin, buddy. And so he got dinged on that anyway. So you kind of go, if you are under that much surveillance, you're not going to be able to pull your Bitcoin out without somebody knowing about it anyway. So unless you just stay entirely in the Bitcoin ecosystem and you never leave it, then I wrote about this in 2016 in my AML paper. You go, sooner or later you have to exchange that for fiat. And that's where money laundering falls apart with crypto in general. And, you have to get that out into the real world until there's widespread acceptance of, like, I'll trade Bitcoin for this thing. Then you end up with those sort of problems anyway. So ultimately, you kind of go, well, it's a great, like, thought experiment. Like, what happens if? And you kind of go, well, if you think there is, not you, but everybody, if you think there is nobody out there working on some way to get around some of these things, I go, well, you haven't been paying attention to the drug war for the last 50 or 60 years, because they always come up with some way to get around sanctions, rules, barriers, and just the enormity of the problem makes it nearly impossible to police, which is why they make examples out of people, because they know they can't go around and gobble up everybody, especially like the low-level offenders and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So they go after the guy. Like, if Michael Seyr decided, hey, I'm going to try and hide 50,000 of my Bitcoin, they're going to absolutely string that guy up and parade him around. And I mean, he's going to get walked through the streets, and people are going to throw fruit at him, and there's going to be someone walking in front of him going, shame. But
Right.
if you've got $500 of Bitcoin and you go, oh, I'm trying to hide my Bitcoin, just nobody gives a shit.
If Bitcoin was worth $10 million, there's a lot of people out there that'd be rethinking a lot of, like, what do I have and how do I have it and who cares? But who knows? I don't know.
I don't sweat it.
We're in a soft age of Bitcoin right now, where, I mean, we're joking after some of the talks. Some of us were joking about how, imagine, decades down the road and your grandkids going, Grandpa, is it true that back in the day you just sent on the main chain, on the base layer, you sent Bitcoin to a friend?
Yeah.
Did you on the base chain, did you buy a book for Bitcoin? It's like, oh, yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but you used to be able to do that, kids.
Yep.
And they'd be like, whoa.
That's crazy.
It's like I was a bank. I was like, I was like a wire transfer service. Anyway, which we're not.
I'm not a money transmitter.
Yeah, I'm not a bank. I'm not a money transmitter, for the record. I don't even
Leave me alone.
I don't own any Bitcoin. I just really love the books.
Yeah.
For the record.
And the merch.
I like the merchandise,
Yeah.
but I wish I could afford a Satoshi at all. I can't afford any.
Taxman cometh.
Yeah, I just avoid Bitcoin completely, personally, in my wallet. There was a facility, I didn't realize this. There's a Columbia Gorge Data Center in Cascade Locks. One of the main facilitators of the talks, a lot of the keynote, in fact, a guy named Bo Turner, he works with Abundant Minds, actually helped found it. Abundant Minds, they've got a base down in Bend. They're in Portland. There was the day after the conference, they were taking people to go look at one of their mining setups. They use Antminer boxes and stuff. Just down the river here, Cascade Locks, the Columbia Gorge Data Center with Abundant Minds at Bonneville Dam. You're talking about a affordable energy, water if you need it, I suppose, and property accessibility with agreements with localities. So that was cool to hear about. Just something local, big growing mining operation. Bo Turner, great guy, great at the facilitation piece and connecting with the crowd and the
Bo knows.
Bo knows. When they have parallel tracks of talks and you want to go to all of it and you can't make all of it, I had to pick and choose. You may have your own experience if you went to this, but I grabbed what I could. There was a great panel about Bitcoin is for financial professionals, and they talked a lot about Bitcoin's integrating with TradFi. After that talk, I talked with one of the speakers, Andrew Hans. He has a firm, New Market Capital, among others he's involved with. But he was on TFTC about a month ago with Marty. He had a great talk that was, and we have run into this a little bit. When we're talking with TradFi guys, very conservative minded.
For our thousands of years, what's TFTC?
Oh, Truth for the Commoner. It used to be Tales from the Crypto years ago when I started listening to them. They've rebranded in a good
bloody
way.
shitcoiners. Anyway, sorry,
yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Crypto was still a thing.
So
TFTC, Marty was talking to Andrew Hans. He made a great point where for a lot of us, we start getting into Bitcoin and it's kind of like you're either kind of all in and it's a big pot. And at least the way I'm used to thinking about it is I get really maxish about it. Then you try to bridge the gap with, say, an established or traditional finance director or a municipality, a PERS situation, like what Dennis Porter works with states at the state level, let alone the federal level. But your traditional, very smart investor types are going to see Bitcoin as a volatile risk, the way they're looking at it. Granted, a lot of investment is thinking, their long time preference is in terms of 5-10 years. Whereas
30, yeah.
Yeah, and with Bitcoin, Michael Saylor's long-term view on it is what would a creature that lives for 10,000 years invest in? And that's sometimes where I go in my thought process on investment. And like explaining it to my mom, she's like, well, what kind of like gains would you expect? And it's like, I don't know how to explain that because I'm thinking like generational wealth. And then it's like, well, okay, I don't know what to make of that. What Andrew Hans makes a point about is that, for example, when you're going to make steel, something really strong, you take iron and you mix it with carbon or another alloy like, molybdenum or manganese. And there's others. But basically for TradFi folks, there's Bitcoin. And Alpha Zeta has a good talk on this. He works for Swan. He's from South America, a finance guy, learned Bitcoin, made a great formula that tracks out risk-reward scenarios of Bitcoin. Yeah, Alpha Zeta. Andrew Hans was describing to me, he gave me kind of his sort of version of an elevator pitch that he gives to TradFi conservative, if you call it that, and that he says, okay, say Bitcoin's a volatile risk, but if you understand Bitcoin at all, you don't want none of it. Right. You're going to have all your other investments in various ways, and there's so much to talk about in the traditional sense. If you want to get in on Bitcoin, what does that mean for you? 1%, 2%, 5%? It sounds like small amounts in a way, but some of these people are sitting on investments, multifaceted investments of, hundreds of millions of dollars or more. And so that's not nothing. And then you can look at the risk reward of, well, say impossibly Bitcoin went to zero. It can't. But if Bitcoin went way down or just went nowhere for your investment, does that hurt you too much when you still have your other investments together? No. So you're okay. And if following any sense of history about Bitcoin at all and where things are going and what it is, if you understand Bitcoin, what if it doubles, triples, 10x, 100x? Your risk to reward doesn't fit what you thought it was.
Correct.
It feels volatile or high risk. Put 2% of it, and if it does what it's been doing, all of your TradFi investments are much less interesting compared to what Bitcoin did.
Correct.
Bitcoin just made your portfolio for you. So next round, it's like, gee, not just what if, but what now?
Right.
That's part of the Great Realignment. He has a great pitch on talking to financial directors about how Bitcoin can work for you, for what you're comfortable with, but that's not zero.
Right.
That was a very interesting talk. And
well, Jeff Bezos has a quote from ages back. He said, if you have a 1 in 100 chance of something doing 100x, you always take that bet. Like, there's no time to not take that bet. Like, you are an absolute moron if you don't take that bet. And unfortunately or fortunately maybe for the TradFi guys, the TardFi guys as I call them, they look at things in a very, very, very narrow lens. And Lynn Alden was on Bankless recently, and she's been talking a lot about fiscal dominance and monetary dominance and things like that. And I think if you're not familiar with those terms or those concepts, it's really, really important for people to start wrapping their heads around that, especially when it comes to things like investing. And right now, if you go and look at anybody that's running a pension fund or something like that, all these people have been investing under a monetary dominance paradigm, which is like you buy stocks and bonds and you sort of balance that. And that's been very performant. When we enter into a phase of sustained fiscal dominance, those things fall apart. They don't work. And you only need look at Japan and the experience of Japan to see what fiscal dominance looks like. And what you end up with is a bunch of zombie companies and flat to declining returns for 30 years. So you go, do you want to keep hanging on to that for, but the thing is, if you talk to a TardFi guy, they just can't wrap their head around it because all they've known is like, I've heard all the doom and gloom since the 1990s, blah, blah, blah. And you guys have always been wrong. Okay, like Peter Schiff's been banging this drum since 1982 or something, I can't tell. Mm-hmm. But the thing is they're wrong until they're right. And when it becomes right, like a lot of TardFi guys are going to be caught with their pants down. And like I've said, I think I said it in my book, or at least in an article I wrote in the past, it's like those are the guys that they made they made windows and high rises not open for those guys because they're the ones that go, oh my God, I just lost $256 million overnight and I don't know why. Goodbye, cruel world. And they go bailing out the window.
They didn't have an escape hatch.
Well, they didn't understand what it is. They become very, very overconfident in their abilities because they've been winning based on a game that's heavily skewed in their favor, And it's like the penultimate, like everybody gets a prize thing. Like you just show up and you put in the hours at Goldman Sachs and you get a license to print money. They joke about it. They talk about it. Hey, you just got your license to print money. And when you're operating in that environment, it's real easy to get caught up in this idea like, well, it's because I'm brilliant, it's because I did this. I go, no, you're playing a rigged game.
You're at the dealer's seat at the table.
Right. So. Like every time you go up to bat, you've got a runner on third base. Like, of course you're going to win the goddamn game when the other guy has to run all the way around the bases, right? So if you start thinking I'm really good at baseball because every time I step up to bat, I got a runner on third, then you get a very skewed view of the world. When you actually when they take those guys out and put them back in the batter's box and go, no, you have to get a runner all the way around now. They go, what? But that's never been the way it's been for me.
I was born on third base.
Yeah, I was always born when I just bloop a single and I get points. And they get wrecked 100%. So in talking to the TardFi guys, I like that approach of like, well, 1%, 3%. Like Lawrence Leopard talks about that a lot. He goes, you're dumb not to have it because if it moons, you're going to be sitting there going, gosh darn it, I had a chance to turn my 1% portfolio. Right. There's a crypto shitcoiner, Rand Nooner. He's a crypto banter guy. He had this experience with Terra Luna, and he had bought a little sliver of it, and he was a pre-sale guy, so he got in. He was part of the hustle, basically. But he had this allocation, I don't know, 100,000 Luna, a million Luna tokens, I don't know, when he got them for like a quarter. And then that thing mooned to like $130. So all of a sudden, this guy was sitting on like $150 million worth of Luna tokens. And he used to show a pie chart where he said, look, my Luna allocation was this little sliver on the pie chart, And now it's like a Pac-Man. It looks like, it's all Luna, and all the rest of his investments, his quote unquote investments in crypto, were other shitcoins and Bitcoin and stuff like that. And people would always tell him, like, you need to diversify out of that, because that's, But the point is that exponential growth curve caught him so far off guard that he got very convinced, like, hey, I'm a genius. I got in on this. And when Luna started collapsing, like, he has a team of finance people going, dude, do you want to sell? And he goes, no, I trust in Do Kwon. And it's like, what? What are you talking about, dude? That thing just slumped like 30%. And then the next day it slumped another 70. And so he got absolutely wrecked. To his credit, he got on the air the next day and was talking about how he just lost 9 figures, because I don't know anybody that's lost 9 figures. But the broad point being is that exponential curve caught him so far off guard. Just his little sliver, 1 or 2% allocation of Luna turned into 80% of his portfolio just because of the exponential growth in Luna. That was all speculative bullshit, but the same thing's going to happen with Bitcoin. And these people that have 1% allocations, 2% allocations, they're suddenly going to wake up one day and just go, oh my God, Bitcoin is 70% of my net worth. Mm-hmm. And my net worth is now 50 times higher than it was like last year. Like, holy shit. So it's going to fundamentally change a lot of things. But by then, that's when the FOMO kicks in. That's when all the baboons come in. And that's all the people that bid up the last little hump of Luna before it collapsed. But those are going to be the same people that are chasing Bitcoin when they go, oh, I didn't want Bitcoin at 68,000 because I thought that was stupid. Now that it's 680,000, I really want Bitcoin as much as I possibly can,
Right.
So, yeah, the 1% allocation, I think, is an effective strategy to get people off zero.
Off zero, but they're not going to be orange pilled, because
right.
They've got both feet planted firmly in the fiat world, and that's their view. But if they just start to edge in, for me personally, sometimes it's like, that is so nothing, but it's also not, because comparatively, it could just eat up your Pac-Man. So that was a very interesting talk with Andrew Hans. Connected with him, that was really cool. There was a good talk about personal security and OPSEC. We talked about some of that here already. Scott Kisser is a Chief Information Security Officer at Swan. He gave a talk. He also moderated a panel. A lot of interesting insight on, like what I talked about, but thinking through your operational security. And you hear about the scams. It's easy to blame individuals at times for, like, pig butchering, or older folks being susceptible to social engineering, people doing dumb stuff with their keys that you can be like, oh, well, don't do that. There are so many inroads now of just attack vectors that they try, and then we're learning of new things at times where it's just good to be aware of that. One point made was that less and less is not that it's not being attacked, but like big collections of data, companies, storehouses of information. There's a distributed attack occurring now on individuals, where a lot of these attacks used to go like, okay, if it's known that you have many Bitcoins, like hundreds of Bitcoins, you're a target. Anymore, you've got, like on a recent What Bitcoin Did podcast with June Seth, you've got to listen to that because it's gold. It's one anecdotal story, but he got this scammer, literally like a 16, 17-year-old kid on the phone who was caught by June Seth, like, hey, dude, you're a scammer. What do your parents think of you? And he kind of grilled him. Yeah. But the kid was like, okay, you got me, and then just divulged bragging about his Lambos or whatever bullshit. He's like lying about some stuff, but he also shared a lot of good info about what he does and how he does it. Yeah. And effectively for these kids, $100,000 is a lot to them. And they don't even have to get a whole Bitcoin out of somebody. That's a lot to me. Oh, it's a lot to me. I mean, when I have no Bitcoin, any amount would be kind of cool to imagine. These kids don't, and they work in, an umbrella operation of, they're sharing their earnings and stuff to probably a shot caller or who knows what, but somebody who helps manage things. But they will cold call and auto call and find people, like, you get a call, you may be at risk, your account's at risk, you have an account here, your name, whatever, Press 1 if you want to fix your security hole.
Right.
Anyone who presses 1 already has a fish mouth on the hook.
Yeah.
We got one who's willing to press 1. Oh, I may be at risk here. And then they connect with, what was his name? Daniel.
Yeah.
17-year-old Daniel living with his parents who would love to get a few $1,000 out of you.
Yeah.
So if you have any Bitcoin, say you're not even a whole coiner, you have some sats on some account somewhere that they're aware of or perceive, or they know you've got a Google account and they found something on you. They'll try to get that, and they'll spend hours of time to get little portions of Bitcoin from you, knowing that it's worth enough to them to bother with. And then, I mean, he's probably bragging about it, but if you're talking tens of thousands a week for a kid who, a few thousand is cool.
That kid said his biggest haul was like in the 6 figures,
Yeah.
They even mentioned Swan by name. Like that kid mentioned Swan. He says, yeah, we're just waiting for the 3-day hold on transfers out. But, once that clears, we're probably going to get 25, 30 grand or something like that. And he sounded pretty confident that was going to go through. So
I think Swan, I don't know. I heard Swan found it or caught it or stopped it.
They probably did. I mean, I think their security is pretty robust. But yeah, I mean, like Fritz, like what you said, there's you should really watch that interview because it's all social engineering attacks. And if you think you're not vulnerable, you are 100%. I am. Everybody is. There's a famous YouTuber who goes around. He actually backwards engineers things, and he taps into like scam centers, and he can tap into their phones and do all this sort of fun stuff. He got scammed. So this guy does this for a living, and he got hustled out of his Google credentials or whatever. And if that guy can fall for it, you can fall for it 100%. And as the scammer said in the interview, he goes, "We just brand fear and greed, and that's all we do." Yeah, and it's super easy to get vulnerable to. I mean, if you think you can't be scammed, if you think you can't be hacked, then you are making yourself far more vulnerable to being scammed and hacked. So, yeah. It's
like you're not going to get the call from the company about your risk. You're just going to try to log in one day and it's suspended for some reason, or the approach is different. But enough people, I mean, you don't know about it. Juneseth says he gets a few calls a week, and then others with any amount of Bitcoin and are in the business a bit get like a call a week on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've never had any because I don't have any Bitcoin, but it's just something to be aware of. That was very interesting. And Scott went over a lot of good best practices that I'll put on the screen here, but there's just a number of simple things you can do to help, as preventative measures, just nip it in the bud. Troy Cross and Margot Paez had a good talk about Bitcoin is for environmentalists. People now Troy being, he's a professor of philosophy and humanities at Reed College. Recently, tech advisor for New Layer Capital, fellow. I'm a fellow, I think. Are you a fellow?
I don't know.
He's a fellow.
I'm a fellowship of the ring.
We're fellowship of the ring. He's a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Basically, been around. I saw him live in person for the first time a year ago at Miami 2023 on What Bitcoin Did Live. Great talk. Anyway, he was really good at.
When I was at Bitcoin Miami, I spent most of my time in the food court.
Food court.
All these great
well, we met people there too.
Just wandering around the food court. Maybe I'll try a corn dog today. I don't know. I had fun. I enjoyed it, but that was, I guess I'm just not much of a conferencey guy. I don't know. I'm going anyway, but I'll probably spend all my time in the food court in Prague.
And whether it's the food court or the coffee arena or beer hall, what I like about the conferences, like I mentioned, is I can go to the presentations and I've heard it before. I get some new insights. It's inspiring to me, but it's not as much the content that I needed. It's the people around.
Right.
And it's the people I run into, or you got a badge. Well, like at the Bitcoin conference, Bitcoin is for everybody. Small venue, relatively.
Yeah.
And so you're around, say, 100 people, and you're just talking, and what's your name? Oh, what do you do? Oh, cool. And there's this inherent trust, and you get to sharing, and you learn stuff you never heard before, or you make a connection you never would have made, and it's very personal.
Yeah.
That's what I get out of them. The Bitcoin is for environmentalist talk. Of course, talking about grid decentralizations, burning off methane at landfills, reducing carbon, stabilizing grids, all of that. We know it. Some people were, I think it's fading FUD, but about Bitcoin consuming so much energy, and but people don't understand how grids and energy production and gas venting off waste occurs. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, I think people really underestimate energy in general. There's a guy, Bullshit Jobs, that's his Twitter handle or X
Okay.
handle or whatever. I made some comment on, I think, Rajat Sony's, he's a CFA, and he's a really prolific writer on Twitter. Really brilliant guy. And, I'd commented something about, like, well, Bitcoin fixes it. I don't know what it was. Because we've all been embroiled in bullshit jobs for so long, And the Bullshit Jobs guy, he's just like a whinger on bullshit jobs. Like, he just hates bullshit jobs. And he came in and said, Bitcoin just wastes energy and this and that. I go, well, and you hear that sort of thing all the time. I go, well, it doesn't waste energy. It's securing, that energy is put to very, very good use. It's securing
it's
property
worth
rights
it
for,
anyway.
Well, but it's securing property rights for
Yeah.
millions of people. And you go, that if you think that's a waste,
Exactly.
You're mistaken. And
even if we had to just create and burn energy for that, Bitcoin itself is equivalent to, say, Netflix and porn, but it would also pale in comparison to large data centers that are providing your cat videos, or AI. Hey, tell me about this AI. Click. That's a lot of energy doing that.
well, think about how much energy is wasted securing your property rights right now. Like, police officers
Physically.
aren't cheap.
Right, physically.
The title office isn't cheap. None of the title companies and all the buildings they sit in, all the roads we drive on, and all that kind of stuff, the courts and all that, like, that all requires energy, and people really underestimate it. They just think this shit magically grows out of the ground, and it's like, no, this all took oil. So if you think somehow that's a waste, but this is okay, your priorities are all buggered up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a problem with the green lunatics anyway, because they'll go out and they're wearing mass-produced clothes, talking on mass-produced things, and all of that stuff got shipped over in containers, and it all requires massive amounts of petroleum to create. They go, hey, we're going to block traffic to protest oil. It's like, your whole life disappears if you get rid of oil. So I don't know what you guys, like, how do you think you're going to survive? Do you know how to grow food? You don't even know how to dress yourself appropriately.
Yeah.
So whatever.
The ideology is there, and I'm an environmentalist. Yes, let's be ecological about everything, but I can't reconcile, you've got your Starbucks, but you feel okay about it if you recycle that paper cup, because that is going to turn up again somewhere, somehow.
Well, it was like the University, I think it was the University of Oregon came out with a carbon footprint study, and they kept coming back to the very inconvenient conclusion that having children is probably the worst carbon disaster you can create as an individual human being. And they go, just bringing one new American child into the world creates something like an additional 60,000 tons of carbon. They said you could recycle your bags and drive a Prius and do all this shit for the next 200 years. You'd never make up just for having one kid. And so when you look at someone like who's got 5 kids or 6 kids or something like that, and they're like, well, I recycle my bags. So, well, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, if you're so worried about your carbon footprint, like, you have created more of an environmental disaster just by reproducing.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, we don't have any problem with carbon emissions or any of that kind of stuff if we don't have waste. And right now, the biggest problem we have is we just waste everything because it's been so abundant, because of the fiat world that we live in. This debt-driven everything creates all of this waste, and all that waste is the thing that drives all of these carbon emissions. So whether you put any stock into global warming or not, sort of irrelevant. If you took it as true and you said, okay, let's just assume against whatever evidence you may have at your disposal that carbon, like global warming, is a real thing, you go, well, yeah, it makes sense. We should probably not let that happen, right? But the quickest way to get there is to stop having wasteful practices. Because we have massive energy abundance, we have massive food abundance, we have massive clothing abundance, housing abundance. We have abundance in everything. It's just it's wasted and squandered and allocated incorrectly. So if you get those efficiencies in place, and this problem fixes itself, you don't have to impose these top-down mandates about we want to keep wasting things, but we want to do it with green energy. It's the dumbest sort of approach to things in the world. But that's sort of the problem I have with like a lot of the people in the Bitcoin space, the crypto space. They go, I want everything to be the same. I just want to do it with Bitcoin instead. And I go, well, that's not how it works, man. Like that's not how the world is going to unfold. Like you don't get to keep the fiat world and all the nice things that you like about the fiat world by being able to go buy your Bentleys or squander shit on Netflix or whatever, and just have it so the government doesn't have any say in it. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, and if you go down that austerity environmental path, it's a doom loop in your brain that's kind of a loser think. It can be toxic, and if you want to pursue that, you boil down to like being against having kids or drastic austerity type views that I think are anti-humanity in a way.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I mean, it's just like, is humanity the virus then? And that's where you see things. And it's like, for some of them, I think they believe that's true. I mean, well,
they do. They call it. I mean, they literally say out loud, humanity is a cancer. It's like, Christ.
Start with yourself, okay?
Yeah, then take a look in the mirror. Yeah,
act locally.
If you're a cancer, you better kill yourself because you're part of the problem.
And you can visualize a fantasy world where what a perfect world would look like. Well, then, man, if you're acting locally for yourself, and it's a hardcore set of measures where you're really digging in and growing your own food and making your own clothes and doing all this stuff, and you're as a force of nature, the global situation of humanity is something else than what you are doing for yourself or to yourself. And Bitcoin fixes this, is the point.
Yeah.
So,
all those folks suffer from the very narcissistic view that it's like everybody else but them is the problem, and they are part and parcel just as much of the problem. Just standing out there and protesting like creates its own environmental problems because you got cars idling. So it's
cathartic for them.
For them, yeah.
It's probably symbolic and cathartic, and beyond that, it's like, okay, how are we actually fixing this?
Well, they're not, and that's the ultimate point. It's like they're just as wasteful as everybody else. They just don't want to admit it. And that's sort of where I'm coming at with the book and everything else. Is like once you realign incentives, and Robin Seyr brought this up on it was Charlie Munger said, "Show me a man's incentives, and I'll show you what they're focused on." And you look at the incentives of fiat, and they're all busted up and broken. So you go, well, no wonder everything's all busted up and broken.
Mm-hmm.
But take it a step further, and like Brian Johnson, the longevity guy, he makes the very salient point that the way we treat our bodies is the exact same way we treat the world, and it's very chaotic and it's top-down control. And the top-down control always induces us to do stupid things that are against our own best interests constantly. And so maybe we should fire the top-down control guy and just follow the data, follow the science, all that kind of stuff. And but I think it's very true. Like if you look at the fiat system and where those incentives go and how we treat the world and how fiat treats the world, and you go, yeah, pretty much looks like the way everybody treats their bodies. They eat a bunch of junk food and they bitch about things and they feel like shit all the time and they take a bunch of pills to try and cover it up, and and then you go, yeah, fiat world kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, and that's where when I say Bitcoin fixes this, as everybody does, when it integrates with you personally, you start recognizing those things like fiat food. The seed oil discussions, toxicity and versus quality. And yeah, it's just a whole new way of thinking that is long-time preference and also simply what works and ultimately would be more ecological. Dennis Porter with the Satoshi Action Network, he gave a great talk. Bitcoin is for Oregonians. And he kind of went over like a lot of his various aspects of the pitch he gives when he's traveling from state to state and state. He has done great work in getting legislation passed, politicians on board, and just protections and allowances for Bitcoin holding, Bitcoin mining, and getting Bitcoin in on investments, PERS, fixing economic systems for the balance sheets of government and public sector and into the private sector. He is writing a book about Bitcoin for global leaders. He's working on it now. It may be out later this year. He touched upon that because his approach is starting at the state level, as I understand it, going from state to state and state. And when you think about, well, say the federal government, though, wants to regulate it differently or criminalize it differently or clamp down on it, kind of like the cannabis rules, where, okay, it's classed in a certain way at a federal level and theoretically prosecuted that way at a federal level, but then state by state by state decided, no, we regulate it differently. Mm-hmm. We took it into our hands responsibly and do it different. And as it started with 1 or 2 or 3 states for a while, and now it's, I don't know how many, but it's dozens of states 32. That said, it's like 32. They can't ignore that, and they're not going to crack down on that. And then now the federal government is looking at reclassifying its schedule on that. So that's how it can work, is state by state, and then it trickles upwards and makes a change.
Well, I would point out at the cannabis level, like I mentioned this I was doing a peer review for some publication, and the author of the paper I was reviewing was saying, well, it's legal at the state level. And I go, no, it's not. That's not a true thing. But that these are still, every state that passed cannabis laws are still operating outside the law. So they're just violating state or federal law. There's no legalization by the technical terms of it. I understand that's the sort of perception, and yet if you talk about it in a technical sense, you go, the federal law is supreme in the land. And when people talk about this stuff, I go, the reason they passed these federal supremacy laws back in the day was to control like wheat farmers, not weed, but wheat, like, the grain that you make bread out of. And their ability to, set that policy nationwide roots back to Depression era laws. So the idea that somehow these guys have just usurped, federal authority, no, they didn't. I mean, at any time, all it takes is one attorney general with a boner for stamping out weed laws could just go around and they just shut down funding to states, and they could absolutely enforce federal, cannabis laws, no problem.
I don't think it would fly if they tried.
Oh, 100% fly. That's absolutely 100%.
That would be a lot of effort in a lot of geographic just places. Like, how do you do that, I guess? You
go, we're cutting off your state funding until you shut this down. And they go, well, what about our highways? You go, well, you can pay for your highways without federal funding. And you figure all 50 states take massive amounts of federal dollars. That's how they've held states over a barrel for the last 100 years, is they just go, well, they threaten state funding. Hey,
but they didn't over cannabis.
They didn't. The point is not whether or not they did it. The point is, because clearly they didn't. The broader point is they could anytime they wanted. In fact, Trump's attorney general had the first guy. Who was that guy?
I don't know.
He lasted about 3 months. I don't know, but he had a real boner for shutting down cannabis, and I was looking around at the world, going like, all you guys that have built your little businesses around cannabis and all that kind of stuff, you're operating at very high risk. Like, you can get rug pulled just as quickly as Google rug pulls your business for saying the wrong thing. So, until it changes at the federal level, that federal law holds precedence over all of these states, and all of these are factually invalid. Like, you just go, those aren't valid exercises of authority. I know it's a sort of legal dithering point, and yet it's factually correct. You go like, well, none of those laws are valid.
And yet we have the ETFs, and
ETFs
with Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, what's that got to do with cannabis?
Well, just if the feds wanted to regulate it differently or crack down it in a way where I thought, oh yeah, well, they could just shut it down. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, they're allowing for paths for it to work.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, the thing is, there's clearly no appetite to try and shut down the cannabis industry, and yet there's also been massive reluctance up to this point. And there's all these, conservative folks that are going, "Oh, we shouldn't allow that." I mean, there's a lot of money and a lot of momentum behind prohibition of narcotics and drugs, And there's massive. I mean, we have the Drug Enforcement Agency. There's thousands of officers and tens of thousands of administrative personnel, and that whole infrastructure is supported solely on regulating things like cannabis. You go, hey, we're going to put all those people out of business tomorrow. You go, oh, we don't like that so much because that's part of our GDP, and so none of it is. Nobody cares about the drugs themselves. They just care about the monetary incentives behind them. And so, like with the ETFs, if you read that like Fit 21 legislation, I just go, oh my God, please don't pass this because it's going to open the door to so much. Like, just imagine Luna at the federal level, like Terra Luna at the federal level. Because like every shitcoiner on planet Earth can now. I mean, it just basically negates all security laws. Like you go, hey, I want to raise money to start my skateboard company. And they go, okay, well, you need to register as a security. Oh, no. It's going to be a crypto skateboard company token. So it's just a crypto project. You go, oh, yeah, go ahead. Up to $75 million. You can just raise money. Go nuts. You go, yeah, how does that open the door to fraud? You go, yep, 100%. So like there will be zero reason for anybody to register any security ever again because they can just say it's a token and they can raise money that way. So you go, why would you ever declare something as a security if you can raise 75 million as a crypto token? You wouldn't. Like, the registration burden is enormous, and it costs a couple $1 million to get something publicly listed, and to go through all those disclosures and everything, all the legal loopholes you have to jump through to get an ICO going, or not an ICO, an IPO going. You can just bypass it all according to the Fit 21 rules just by saying it's a crypto token instead of a fundraising for a bicycle company or whatever scheme you come up with. So yeah, it's gonna monkey hammer all kinds of stuff, and people are cheering it on and going, "Hey, it's a positive shift for crypto innovation in the USA." And I go, "Okay, whatever. I'm just gonna stick to Bitcoin. You guys do whatever you want." But you're gonna see fraud on a scale that is gonna make the entire crypto economy look like a joke because it's gonna get into the trillions.
Well, and as they pop, I just think that all the good paths lead back to Bitcoin if you're in that space. And on the federal versus state rights balance of powers, I mean, I can't help but, as a parchment guarantee, regardless, the 9th and 10th Amendments, I don't know what they mean anymore, but
well, none of it means anything.
Yeah.
Gone.
If you ever read the 9th or 10th Amendments, yeah, well, they were in the Bill of Rights too, but that's ancient history, ain't it?
Those old white men.
What did they know?
What did they know?
They were just making stuff up at the time, and none of it's really that
They're all
pertinent.
drunk anyway.
They were drinking beer and just wanted to keep their powers. The closing keynote was by Jeff Booth, and it was great. Jeff Booth is great. Like I mentioned, his energy, his tone, his genius. It's subtle at one level, but the words he says and the graphs he showed, again, I've heard it and I know it, and at the same time, to see him in person or just meeting him in person, like hanging out afterwards for beers. He's just a great guy, and he was teaching me stuff about fediments and stuff like that. He brought the house down, and it was very inspiring. He talked about just look at the sheer numbers of our national debt and money issuance compared to BTC and 21 million. He read a very interesting quote, and it's something that I'll read here because it's a little bit of it's a lot of doom and gloom, but he took a few minutes just to read in his speech something that was posted 11 years ago from an anonymous user on a discussion channel. And I'll just read it as well because I know you have thoughts about it. I see this as being doom, the Great Realignment being glory.
Yeah.
So here's what Jeff Booth read this to the entire crowd straight off this posting here, and I'll just read it real quick. There will be no collapse the way some of these people think of it. It's not going to be like the movie Dawn of the Dead or whatever, where one day suddenly shit hits the fan and prices skyrocket and everybody begins to riot and the SS comes marching down the street to kill everybody. There will be no happening. It's far more insidious than that. Read the poem The Hollow Man by T.S. Eliot and you will understand. You'll just notice that every day simple things will become a little more expensive. Everyone's homes and apartments will start to get smaller. Your work hours will get longer, but your pay will decrease. You'll see family and friends less and find that in time you care less about them. Every day you find yourself lowering your standards for everything: work, food, relationships, etc. Job security will no longer exist as a concept. You'll notice houses and apartments shrinking. People will start hanging on to clothing for longer and longer. Less people will get married, even less will have children. People will engross themselves in technological distractions and fantasy while never truly experiencing the real world. Whatever dream people used to have about what their lives were going to become for them is a distant memory. The only thing left for them will be the reality of their debt and their poverty. And every minute of every day they will be told is, you are stupid and ugly, weak, but together we are free, prosperous, and safe. That is the collapse, the reduction of the American man into a feudal serf, incapable of feeling love or hate, incapable of seeing the pitiful nature of his situation for what it is or recognizing his own self-worth. That's like Orwell 1984 stuff, sort of like the pot getting steadily, slowly hotter and the frogs just sitting in there like, well, but the pot's the same size and we just live in the pot. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's just slow and insidious and eats away at you as your fiat life is diluted. Mm-hmm. And that what he said there was that Bitcoin is the escape hatch. And if you're in on Bitcoin now, like basically if you're at zero, get off zero. Mm-hmm. If you're at 1%, or whether that's ownership or work and energy on learning, if you're doing that at 1%, can you do 2%? If you're doing 5%, can you do 10%? And onward. So basically, whatever you're doing, do more as you can. Get in on it more. For it, like us doing this here, it's a stretch. It takes work. It takes thought and time. And it's been so good for me, at least personally, to like, I can rest on my laurels and say, yeah, I'm in on Bitcoin. Yep, I got some. I know what's up. I DCA. It's a static existence of getting in on an escape hatch. Jeff is saying, what more can you do as we're going here to, whether it's a Bitcoin hyper Bitcoinization or the Great Realignment, we're going there, and it gets down to sort of it can be your personal ethics, or just posturing yourself a little better for you so that as things slide on one hand and get better in others, get your off-ramp from the fiat world into Bitcoin and do that more. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that is a very doomy and gloomy sort of perspective on everything. Like, everything is just going to slowly decline into shit.
I would say this was written before they knew of Bitcoin very
When
well.
was it written?
2011 or 2013.
Yeah. So, and I fully get that. I mean, the history of the world has been dominated by people that predict apocalypse and catastrophe right around the corner for the last 5,000 years. And it rarely, if ever, happens, right? So what you find throughout history is it's the optimists that always win, despite being in the minority, because it's really easy to get scared. It's a lot harder to kind of maintain.
Fear and greed, it falls back to that kind of a thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Fear. We've talked about, there's a real thing, and it's easy to latch on to. The whole Walking Dead series is very popular. It's the Armageddon fetish. Mm-hmm. There's an Armageddon fetish that people can latch onto and say, well, at least I can have control over this part of things if things collapsed. Right. And it's a fantasy.
100%.
But it's almost a fun fantasy.
It is. It's great fun to think about because, you know, that's why people go to movies. I mean, they put themselves in the hero's shoes. That's the purpose of the whole thing. What would I do if my husband left? What would I do if my wife was cheating? What would I do if I lost my kids? What would I do if my kid was taken hostage and I was going to, and it's an easy fantasy to live through, like taken, you don't know who you're messing with and all this kind of shit, right? But, that was one of the things that made No Country for Old Men such a great film. Is because they kind of just, the way the movie ended, I think a lot of people got pissed, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of nice, because the guy goes, I'm coming for you, and then he just gets gunned down. Sorry, spoilers.
You gave it away.
If you haven't seen the movie yet,
I'm reading the book. I haven't gotten to that chapter.
sorry, Fritz.
Cormac McCarthy, right?
What was it? No Country for? Oh yeah, it was.
He also wrote The
The
Road.
Road, yeah, which is another.
That's a great book. Pretty darn good movie too, but it's total Armageddon fetish.
Yeah.
In a poignant human way. I mean, I really related to those books as a father to sons. There's human relationship stuff there.
Yeah,
but it's dark.
Yeah, super dark. I couldn't put that book down. It really messed me up.
Oh yeah.
It was sort of like you feel dirty at the end of that book. You don't.
There's hope at the end, though, right?
Yeah,
Not to give it away, but right at the end.
The butler did it.
Yeah, the butler. Yeah, you find out. I see. Now I read that before I knew of Bitcoin. I read it twice, and I really related to it. But it fit into that Armageddon fetish for me. Like, what would I do? Boy, how would I care for my son through that? I would do what he did, and then it was just so dark and like, oh no, it's no hope. And right at the end, there's that glimmer of hope. It involves humanity. For me now, when I think of reading this quote thing here, Bitcoin is that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Bitcoin's that hope.
Well, that's the thing that I never really liked about this, and oddly enough, I think Jeff Booth can be a little doomy and gloomy himself. Despite his sort of positive outlook on things, I also see like there's that little streak of like things are going to be terrible first, and it's like I don't think they necessarily have to be, right? And if you go back to the 70s. Like it was a very common thing to go, the population explosion. We're all going to die, and everyone's going to die because the population is going to exceed Earth's resources. And by 1985, the population is going to be so big, there's going to be starvation and mass this and mass that. And you just go, and I remember I was a little kid, and I'm just going, oh my God, I don't want the world to collapse, and we should cull the population because there's just too many people.
I feel bad for kids going to school today, or if they're fed climate hysteria stuff, that a kid who just wants to thrive and grow and learn and do, feels like my existence could hurt the planet.
Well, I mean, now the narrative has shifted completely to, well, now it's population decline. We're all going to die because the population is declining. And you go, Christ almighty. Like, I don't worry about either one. And both are predicated on a fiat mindset, 100%. Like, you go, population explosion. We don't have enough fiat to pay for all this. You go, well, it turns out we found all kinds of solutions for population explosion. And, population decline. You go, no one's going to come up with a solution for that. We're all just going to wait until we just rot into death. No, that's not how people work. Like, if you're slowly rotting, you probably go find ways to try and stop rotting, right? And that's true on a societal level as it is on individual
We'd
level.
shift our attention and focus to fix things.
Right. And so, like, to the point you made with your kid, and you go, well, it's terrifying for a kid. But yeah, that's just like it was terrifying for me as a kid growing up, going, like, population explosion is a problem. Now they're going, like, well, your very existence, Junior, is gonna.
You're heating the oceans, boy.
Yeah, you're gonna boil Manhattan. How dare you? And I go, yeah, all these things have solutions at the end of them, and so far the solutions have all been powered by sovereignty, territorial control, and fiat. And right now with Bitcoin, I go, no, we have a thing that's going to change all of that, like almost inevitably, because most people want to gravitate towards life. Like despite people sitting around dooming and glooming and whatever, chaining themselves or cementing themselves to the concrete and blocking traffic or whatever, ultimately they're doing that because they think they're trying to preserve life or trying to go towards a more beneficial future. Their methods are stupid. That's all. And if you have a tool like Bitcoin that can realign incentives to a way that's pro-human rather than pro-hoarding, then it fundamentally changes all this stuff. So rather than, like, I see this and I go, yeah, it's going to just gradually decline until everything's shit, and you're going to look around and realize that I'm hopeless and it's terrible. And I go, well, that's just not how
There's
it works.
no hope or escape hatch here.
Right.
It's just,
But
you're screwed.
With an alignment, with a realignment of incentives, you go, well, it doesn't slowly decline into shit. It might get shittier for a minute, and then slowly it's going to start elevating into, things are just getting better. And you may not know why, and you may not understand the mechanisms behind it. Like, probably, 2% of the population understands how central banking works at all, or the monetary system at all, or what it means when they adjust, interest rates, or what it means to have fiscal dominance versus monetary dominance. Like, how many people truly understand that on some functional level where they could talk coherently about it? You go, I don't know, less than 1%. But they're the people that spread these messages of like, well, if we keep going on this way, it's going to be, everything's going to end. And you go, well, and there's other things that are afoot right now. But all of it is sort of rooted in this idea that the state is all powerful, it's inescapable, there's nothing we can do about it, there's nothing that's ever going to change it, there's nothing that's ever going to make it so the world can get better, or there's nothing that's going to change how we think about things or do things. And that's part of the reason I'm writing the book, is I want to challenge some of these like really cemented in ideas of like everything has to be like fiat, and then we have to put some patch on fiat, and that's going to make everything work. You just don't patch fiat, right? What you do is you fundamentally realign how that whole system works, and then the problems start fixing themselves. And it's Charlie Munger's quote, like, show me a man's incentives and I'll show you what they put their time and energy into. And if our time and energy right now is about hoarding and theft and extortion and greed and all that is born from some very piss poor ideas about how human beings interact. And the core case I'm making in my book is I go, people that assume those things because they've been that way for so long make a grave intellectual error by going, well, because it's been this way for so long, this must be the way it's always been. And like I was just having a discussion with someone about like the thing about a woman comes across a bear or a man in the forest, and I go, which would you be more scared of? I'd be more scared of the man. And I go, Christ almighty. And I told that to someone, and they go, oh, you're one of those douchebags that thinks that men aren't dangerous. And I go, no, I know men are dangerous. It's not that. What I'm suggesting is like that fear is grossly misplaced. But I also look at it like if you ask somebody, are you afraid of flying? And they go, oh my God, I'm terrified of flying. You go, but it's an irrational fear. And I go, every day men and women pass by each other, and there's, oddly enough, like, they're not all just getting murdered immediately. But I go, if you go walking around enough bears, you're going to get wrecked. Like 100%. That's not going to be a long-lasting thing. But every day, men and women routinely interact. And yeah, I can get why you might be scared in a certain situation, like, well, I'm alone in the woods and this creepy guy comes up. You go, well, of course you're going to be scared. I would be scared, though. Like, it's not because I'm a woman. I just go, oh, I'm alone. There's a creepy guy there, and that freaks me out,
You don't know the demeanor of either.
Correct, But ultimately, the idea that all of this stuff is baked in and we just have to find a way to patch over the top of the thing that's baked in, I go, that's fundamentally incorrect. And what I would say to the woman who's worried about coming across a bear in the woods or a man in the woods, I go, would you feel the same way if it was a South American Indian from a native tribe? You go, that man is evil because he's man. Well, yeah, probably not. Like, you'd probably find he's probably pretty friendly and would probably help you out, especially if you were struggling. He came across you in the woods and go, oh my God, you hurt your foot. I don't speak your language, but hey, I can help you get out of this because I know the woods, because I am born of the earth and I live here and I know what it means to navigate this place. So it's like, if you start parsing out, you go, well, what I'm really afraid of is Western men. What I'm really, really afraid of is a certain subset of Western men. And what I'm really, really afraid of is this. And all of it is has been influenced by this narrative that goes, white men are the evil.
Or a personal fear or experience you had.
Correct,
yeah. So.
But to extrapolate that out to all men on planet Earth, you go, that's just not fair to men, obviously. But the broad point being is like, you go, how much of that is driven by fiat ideas? All of them. Like all the climate hysteria and all the everything is driven by a fiat mindset. And if you don't want to supplant the thing that has provided stability, right? Overnight, because that's chaos. Chaos is intolerable. But rather than a gradual decline into shit, I go, well, there's probably a gradual ascent into a higher order of being. Excuse me, that's a coffee burp. Ugh. And that ascent, I think, is a beautiful thing. And I think it's the thing that 20 years from now, they're going to look back and go, oh, you remember all that time we spent about worrying about CBDCs and this and that? And I think, God, we were so crazy. You're going to be worried about something else. Like, did you know that pollen can kill you now? Right? I mean, like, who knows what it's going to gravitate towards. But that once you get the incentive structure right, the rest of this stuff starts getting better.
We can always conjure up new fears, and I mean that's capitalized on, of course, every day in headlines or news media and what sells, and it can be either fear or greed, and just base emotional type things. But the Great Realignment wouldn't be that. This doom and gloom, I don't think has legs when you have Bitcoin, and it's not that it's all going to simply slide. With Bitcoin, be like, okay, yes, say we're on a Titanic and the Titanic is sinking and it's sinking and it's sinking and the music's still playing or they're still serving drinks and people are kind of collecting over on one side of the ship, but you can start to see it coming, and so then we're also building our own escape hatches, life rafts, if you will, and so whether it actually sinks or not completely, or just is really not a place you want to be, you can just shift over to what is working better. Say the Titanic sinks, you have your floating device, or alternate Titanic.
Yeah. Well, what I would suggest is it's more like if someone came along and go, well, we can fix the hole. You go, what's that look like? You go, well, it means you get to kind of stay on the boat. You don't have to jump off in a life raft. Like, we've got this thing that can patch the hole, and then we can slowly start bailing the water out. You go, okay, well, should we do that, or should we just wait for the boat to sink and hop on a raft? You go, no, fix the hole, dummy. Like, it's...
So beyond even the idea that the Titanic is sinking, we're saying with Bitcoin, we're not just building a separate life raft that we can detach on, but Bitcoin can start filling the holes, bailing the water, drying out the engines start running again.
Right.
And then the Titanic is not the Titanic anymore, but it's a new...
Well, I mean, if you sort of carry this analogy out, it's kind of a fun analogy to run through. Is like, you go, all right, Titanic hit an iceberg or got hit by a U-boat. We don't know. there's conspiracies out there. Or
it's not even the Titanic.
It wasn't even the Titanic.
It wasn't even the Titanic.
But if you take that analogy further and you go, there's a hole in the boat, right? And we have a thing, and when you first look at it, you go, oh, thank God, we've got a life raft. Some of us will get off the boat and everyone else can go GFY, right? And or you go, oh, wait a minute. Turns out that the same thing that the life raft is made out of can also patch the hole in the boat. Well, what about all the water and stuff? You go, well, we should probably get rid of all the junk that we don't need so we can keep the boat afloat a little longer. Why don't we start doing that? You go, but my jewelry. You go, well, you can die, you can drown, or you can get rid of the jewelry. You go, okay, my incentive is to get rid of the jewelry and start focusing on things that are healthy and life-preserving. They go, well, what about all the champagne? You go, well, we don't really need champagne right now, but we do need fresh water, so how about we prioritize keeping the fresh water and getting rid of the champagne? Good idea. Chandelier, don't need it. Let's get rid of the chandelier. Let's start getting rid of stuff as we're slowly patching this boat. And it's slowly, and you go, and we can also slowly start getting rid of the water. So about as fast as the water is coming in, we're now able to get it out. And as we're doing that, we're slowly patching the boat so less and less water is coming in. Meanwhile, we need to get rid of all the waste and all the nonsense because our incentive structure right now is wrong. We built this great big floating thing that's chock full of stuff we don't need. So in order to survive, we should probably start casting some of that stuff overboard. And then you can start finalizing things that are like, well, this is really important to me. I want to hang on to it. And I go, okay, let's hang on to those things that are really important, like your coat. Probably makes a lot of sense in the North Atlantic. Your ball gown does not. So how about we get rid of the ball gown? And then sooner or later, the boat is patched and the water is going out. And you go, oh, do we need those life rafts anymore? You go, no, because the boat's working now. In fact, we're starting to get more and more buoyant every single day. And you go, oh, can we incorporate some of the stuff we threw overboard? And you go, well, no, because it's all overboard. But how about we build some new things? You go, well, let's make sure they have more value than the things we stacked this thing full of before. Like, let's make sure it's also life-preserving if we need it. And you're going to learn a lot of lessons about things that you overlooked in the past and started focusing more on things like, oh, man, you remember when the boat was going down and we all wished we would have had a box of matches, or we all wish we would have had XYZ? Maybe let's build some more of those things in case this happens again. You go, yeah. And then suddenly the Titanic looks very, very different. Still the same structure, but it's floating along in a way that's more oriented towards life preservation. It's more oriented towards, there's not the steerage and drowning in the bottom and then the rich people up top. It's like, well, we're all kind of working together towards a common goal, which is to keep the ship afloat, keep this thing going, and then get us into a harbor. But by the time those people make that transition from here to here, after going through this little transition, this great realignment of incentives in the middle of the North Atlantic, when they get to New York, their attitudes, perceptions, and things that they're going to prioritize in life are going to be fundamentally different than the day they left.
And the reasons for that, the process of all that you described occurring, wouldn't be a central power saying, we all need to do this and you need to do this. Every single individual would be making these decisions for themselves because of their own personal alignment and what works for them. So it's not like, hey, we're a communist society now. No, it's more like everyone is just sort of adjusting themselves for the alignment because that's what works.
Correct. And if you look at the central planners, what they did on the Titanic was say, keep playing the music. I go, is that a good plan right now? Just keep playing.
Keep playing. Don't panic, folks.
Keep the drinks flowing, and let's make sure we get the rich people off. And so that's what limited resource top-down thinking looks like. If you centralize control, you centralize thinking, and then that's the results you get, right? Mm-hmm. But like I said, if you had a way to fix the boat, people are going to start gravitating towards fixing the boat. They're going to think that's a far superior method of surviving in the North Atlantic. You go, hey, there's a possibility to fix the boat. Oh, let's do that. Or we can get on these life rafts. What happens then? Well, if no one comes, we're all going to die. Well, that's a shitty idea. Like, how about let's try the boat thing first? Yeah. Let's fix the ship.
People have an image of, I got my life raft, and there's the Titanic sinking over there.
And now I'm alone in the North Atlantic.
Right. Like, we're not leaving the Titanic here, but we have patches and fixes to bail the water and heat the engines again. Yeah. So I like that analogy. There was a funny meme I saw years ago where, spoiler alert, so when the old gal who's recounting her memories of the movie, the Titanic, and at the end she's got her gem that she actually had the whole time and all that, and she drops it into the water like goodbye, all that. There was a funny, like goodbye fiat. Yeah. There was an interesting meme I saw where it's like that feeling you have when you've memorized your 12 words in your brain. And you destroy your hardware wallet, or you burn the paper you had because you're going brain wallet. It's the dropping of the gem into the water, and like that. All of that is just memories in my mind now. Anyway, it was funny. Made me think of that. One thing that floats all of this too, because we're blessed in the world, the modern world we live in, is it touches on a quote that Jeff Booth said. Is that the natural state of economies is deflationary. People think, inflation is how it works. We need inflation. Inflation is a given. The natural state of an economy is deflationary if you're not messing with the money. Yeah. His point on that is, is that between technology and innovations, the number of people affected, things that we learn, that we pass on, the way that we do things now has so increased productivity and efficiency. We can produce with much less effort so much more now. Mm-hmm. And you would think, how do we all not have more if the ways that we do that are not more efficient or done well with technology?
Well, not to argue against Jeff Booth. I think the guy's brilliant. I think you're brilliant, Mr. Booth. So, caveat enabled. I think that's a product of fiat thinking. I go, where did all these efficiencies come from?
Granted, they came from fiat.
Right. Well, what was the incentive to create these efficiencies? You go, well, my purchasing power is going down, my costs are going up. So we need to be more efficient at farming. We need to be more efficient at making shoes. We need to be more efficient at this. We need to be more efficient at that. So people will get caught up in this, like, fiat kills everything. And I go, well, look around, man. Does this look like the world got more dead to you? Because the last 100 years of fiat has brought us air travel and electricity and gasoline-powered cars and clothing selection and aisles and aisles and aisles of food that you can just buy. You know.
Well, so even if all that changed, would we not have that without fiat? I feel like we could still get there and do the same.
Well,
with
I would
Bitcoin.
argue that there's about 250,000 years of semi-human to human development, and the first, you know, let's say it's 250,000 years. You go, well, the first 245,000 of years saw zero development. You go, what efficiencies did they create through technology? Well, they sharpened some rocks, got better at hunting, they made fire.
Well, you could say you could say in a non-fiat world, and we're talking Stone Age here, we evolved from sticks and stones to a spear, a stone on a stick, to an atlatl where you got a lever with a spear and a stone,
Mm-hmm.
to a bow and arrow, a stick with string and a stick and a stone.
Mm-hmm.
So those were innovations that granted took a long time, but were, you know, the pace of everything being differently, that we were able to come up with innovations without fiat.
Right. Did we come up with mass agriculture prior to fiat thinking? No. Because they had 240,000 years no agriculture and then 10,000 years of agriculture. What brought that around?
Well, or maybe beginnings of agriculture spurned fiat thinking, kind of hand in hand. I don't know.
Potentially.
Shepherd stuff.
Yeah. And that is also a possibility as well. I mean, and it doesn't stretch the imagination for someone to look at, like, just sit there with their stomach grumbling, going, man, I haven't found a springbok to kill in a long time. Wish I could eat all this grass, but every time I've tried to eat it before, it gave me diarrhea and I got sick for 2 weeks. What if we mashed it up and turned it into a paste? I don't know, try it, man. I'm hungry, right? And you know, when you start, I mean, you can put those things together, and yet I would say the vast majority of human history has been hunter-gatherers by a mile. Like, it's not even close. Like, there's no, like, you go, there's been 10,000 years of development and 240,000 years of just, like, picking shit off a bush and throwing rocks at things. And so, yeah, there were some technical innovations that came along with getting better at throwing rocks at things, but that's ultimately where you're still at, like, to this day. You know, what happens when you pull the trigger on a gun? Well, I'm taking a little EB rock and throwing it really, really fast because I discovered how chemical reactions work, right? But the core concept is still the same. I'm going to bonk a thing that I can eat from far away so that thing can't bonk me. And you go, well, yeah, but if you look at, like, how did firearms develop and how did all that, because of warfare, where did warfare come from? Well, from someone coming along and saying, this is mine, you can't have it, and you need to get out of my territory because it's mine. And a lot of that came around agriculture and animal husbandry. And where did that come from? Well, it's, you know, you go, was that an efficiency? And depending on, you know, if you watch Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse, and you go, hey, where did all this agriculture come from? Well, it was the giants that survived the Great Flood that came along and taught everybody how to do this stuff. But they didn't teach them how to not deal with greed and all that kind of stuff. So you go, who knows?
So, thought experiment. Let's say that the force of nature that human is, as we depart the Garden of Eden and go from being, you know, subsistence animals ourselves into agriculture and animal husbandry, and we create these worlds that are infected by fiat at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so didn't know it, couldn't avoid it. It was sort of just what happens to, you know, organisms that live on a planet that evolve in that manner. It was perhaps not just unavoidable, but also important in a way at its time to create the trajectory of growth and expansion and all that. And then you get to a point where we see a new problem that is the fiat itself. Mm-hmm. And we hit that wall, and breaking through that, we fix. So we got to where we are now. Right. We start to fix the fiat. I don't see that being sliding back into no growth, no development, even as it's in an alignment and we reprioritize and have a low time preference. I still see that including the technology we can produce and share and have, the communication, a global sense of trade, just differently.
Yeah, maybe.
I guess we don't know. I guess I'm hopeful about it in the sense that I see innovation and technology growing as well as it did before, but just fixed with Bitcoin versus pushed by fiat. And but maybe. So it's still, there'd still be growth and development, but instead of the direction being pushed in a fiat way, they're promoted for humanity the way wherever we want to go.
Right. Well, I think that's the beauty of it is like last week when we were talking about it, I go, we can't really picture what the world looks like without fiat because our whole world is built on fiat. So you go, what does the world look like if we never had it? And I go, we're probably still picking berries off a bush and throwing rocks at animals. But we got it, so that's the reality we live in now. And the thing is, there have been massive benefits that came from the fiat development of the fiat system that we all exist in right now. You go, hey, 8 billion people can live on this planet, no problem. Oh, some problems, fits and starts.
We have problems, but
the broad point being is like rather than having the planet capped at a homeostasis level of like 500 million human beings, we now have tipped the balance of homeostasis to 8 billion human beings. You go, well, that's in part because of fiat, because of the developments that came with fiat. But it's also like a science fiction movie. Is like, they used to, in the 1950s, watch a science fiction movie and go, how far did people dream? And they go, oh, well, the flying saucers are going to go to Mars and find out it's made of cheese and whatever. Today, if you look at the fantasy, you go, oh, well, since we've learned all this stuff, we can envision things like wormholes and different galaxies and different universes. And, so it expanded the consciousness on such a profound level that, like Star Trek fantasy shit from the 1960s is now like in my pocket right now. Like I can beam me up. I can't beam, but I can communicate with a communicator, and I have a supercomputer in my pocket. So these are all pretty impressive transformations of the human species. So you go, if fiat suddenly, if we gradually realigned incentives so we are no longer incentivized to overproduce garbage to keep the fiat system alive. If we are not incentivized to create waste so we can have selection, if we're not incentivized to create bigger and bigger houses to satisfy social conventions, and we're not incentivized to do bullshit jobs just to keep the fiat thing going, if you change all those incentive alignments, I don't think people will suddenly go like, hey, you know what, I've always wanted to pick berries off a bush and throw rocks at animals. I don't think we'll go there.
Sure.
Because why would you? Because you go, well, you know what, it's kind of nice to be able to have air conditioning.
The human mind is always looking for the shortcut and the easier path, and we can't help but think about that.
Well, we've already got those innovations now. Like we go, is there food abundance? Oh yeah, 100%. Just go to McDonald's every day and look at the backyard or look in the dumpster and go, how much food did they just throw out?
I've heard a stat long ago, but that like of all the food produced, like say grown and made, 80% of it ends up as waste.
Yeah, waste.
At some level,
Mm-hmm.
and whether that's the production, the packaging, the sales, the excess, and then what we ultimately consume or can't ship and trade around.
Right.
It's a lot of waste in that.
Extraordinary amounts of waste.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at that and you go, we already have food abundance. We already know how to overproduce food on such a mass scale. If it weren't for artificial scarcity, food, everybody would be well fed globally. No problem, without even a second thought. There is no incentive to do that. So if you change that incentive structure and you go, now we are incentivized to make sure everyone is fed, because that is better. What I think you'll find is, like we talked about last week, Jack Mahler's was saying, population decline and, declining birth rates are because of fiat. And I go, well, I would say declining birth rates are because of fiat, but not because of the reasons he's suggesting. I say it's because of fiat because kids don't die as much. So there's less incentive to make more people because you don't have to worry about, I had 10 kids, 3 of them died. You go, well, thank God I had 7 more because I need help with the farm.
And I think people appreciate their sense of independence and not being tethered, or there's less incentive to need kids when you're doing fine yourself,
Yeah, and so what I think will happen is like there is a biological drive to reproduce the species, right? Like I don't think people are just suddenly going to stop having babies and go, well, I don't need kids anymore. And I also think like if you have a system where there's abundant food, and there's abundant energy, and there's abundant clothing, and there's abundant housing, you go, well, what's the incentive to have kids? Well, if I want them or not. That's it.
Right.
I take great joy in raising children. Oh, great. You can have kids. You go, I don't want to take great joy in raising. You won't have to. I don't have to worry about I have to make more kids than die because I'm well fed and well clothed and so you go, I think the population stabilizes at whatever rate that
the people want it to be.
Yeah, whatever it's incentivized towards.
And it's not that it's good or bad that it's going up, or good or bad that it's going down. It'll just settle into what people want, and it's all sustainable.
100%. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go, what's that world look like? And I go, it sounds magical to me. I think it sounds wonderful. And I think, if you were allowed to let people take their biological drive and go, you know what? It's not so bad having kids because I don't have to worry about childcare. I don't have to worry about retirement. I don't have to worry about this and that and the other thing. You go, well, the incentive is to follow my biological drive. You go, maybe the population will explode. Maybe we'll have a baby boom that is unprecedented. And maybe not. I don't know. But if you're not also worried about, well, we need to replace an aging workforce, you go, that's such a fiat idea. You go, Christ almighty, like the world doesn't have to work that way. Mm-hmm. And properly executed, provided the network stays decentralized and secure, Bitcoin provides an opportunity to realign those incentives so we can incorporate the abundance we've already created and give access to that to everybody around the planet. You go, well, what sort of innovations do you have right now if the genius down in the Sudan doesn't starve to death and comes up with some great new theory about how to do unlimited space travel or whatever? You go, God, man, the humanity's capabilities and capacities are unlimited at that point because you are untethered from this fiat reality, and we've already got the foundation of the fiat excess that we've created. So you go, oh, now we have a platform to envision a world that is so much more remarkable than anything we ever could have conceived of. And all it takes is that little switch. It's all encased right now in 625 exahash of property rights. You go, neat. That sounds like a great outcome to me.
That's what it boils down to. And for those of you who are parents out there, or some of you maybe who are parents and have that long time preference and experience as I do, being a parent is hard work, and in the short term feels like, why did I do this?
Yeah.
The long view on it, the low time preference of it is the rewards that are hard to put on a balance sheet.
Incalculable.
It's incalculable. It's just a life reward, and that's where, for me, humanity itself, parenting for the right incentives, for the right reasons, will make better parents, better kids, a better sense of values and purpose in life. And so people are not going to just stop because, oh, I'm free, I can do what I want. And after a while, as you age, you might start to feel, gee, having a companion is nice. Yeah. Having kids, boy, well, as anyone who's ever dated in their youth or whenever, dating is hard work. Yeah. Finding that person you like or having to cut bait with someone you don't, that's all hard work. Yeah. And in the long run can be worth it. Raising kids, changing diapers, parenting, that's hard work. Oh, why am I doing this? But you're looking at the low time preference reward, and I think part of the Great Realignment can the roots go into societal interests that are for quality. Yeah. And I don't need to go into that, but anyway.
Well, I would say I'm a gradualist. I think we're going to gradually get amazing. So
I feel hopeful. Bitcoin's hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's pure hope. And, any of this doom and gloom stuff, I go, yeah, it might get tricky in the short term. But, man, long term, you just go, human beings are amazing. We're an amazing species. We create beauty that is, I think, unique in the universe, honestly. And that's not nothing. So I've reevaluated my sense of being pro-humanist in recent years, not just raising my kids and seeing them grow, but seeing what we're doing. And granted, we have all the fiat baggage in the world, and we have all the fiat greatness.
And I'm excited for where we're all going too, because we do amazing things. Yeah. And at the conference, what it reminds me is that I can walk into a room with all kinds of people from different backgrounds and different interests or particular angles on things, and I come away with it feeling optimistic and hopeful about just people being involved in stuff they're interested in. It's got a fundamental value to it that humans can't help but make the world interesting and improve on what they can. Yeah. And I just get really excited about that.
Yeah, feels great. Get on Bitcoin Standard.
Bitcoin Standard. Jeff Booth says, hey, if you're doing 5% right now, can you do 10? So I keep thinking about what can I do more in that in that way, and it reframes
I'm thinking
my
about
brain all the time.
50% Bitcoin time, 100% Bitcoin finance.
Yeah, that's not a bad model.
So I'm 3/4 Bitcoin. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do what I can. There was so much. I mean, there's so much more. So I've got my free Swan notebook that I got from the conference. I had to write notes down in it.
Swan notebook.
I've got some I've got some swag for you.
Oh, did you? Awesome.
I got copies of a book. I've got Inventing Bitcoin, the book by Jan Pritzker with Swan.
I invented Bitcoin. I'm Satoshi Nakamoto.
Oh yeah, that's another. Oh, so I want to ask you that question. So written by Jan Pritzker with Swan. Anyone who's new to Bitcoin or is just starting out with it, this is a great intro. It's easy read, short, and really simple to kind of get somebody started on the path and what is Bitcoin. And Inventing Bitcoin is a good intro.
I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, me too. I can't name all the names that were at the conference. There's just too many, and I could spend a bunch of time trying to name drop everybody, and my memory's not that good, and I'm no genius.
Oh, Fritz.
Yeah.
You dropped a name over there.
I did. I dropped a couple of names here.
That was funny.
I want to recognize all the great people that, Eddie and his wife who put the conference on. I know it's a lot of work. They handled it well. Like, when Jeff Booth had his keynote conclusion talk, and we just had gotten to the Q&A, and they dealt with some little technical problems. We're in the McMenamins Kennedy School. It's an old infrastructure, and they made it work at the old theater, and it was great. And little things would happen, audio check, the video's not coming up. That happens, as you've experienced in things you've done. Stuff like that comes up. Didn't rattle people. People were good for it. Eddie was not looking stressed. Just kept it going, and hey, we're making it happen here. That's the important thing. Jeff Booth got to the Q&A portion, wrapping up his speech. The power went out. The whole building, actually, was the whole block.
Right.
We lost. It was pouring down rain. You could kind of hear the rain outside, and it's like, it's kind of rainy out, and the power goes out. It's dark for a bit. The generator kicks on. The dim lights come up. We can still see, but the audio's all out. And we're in the middle of the Q&A session. And so people are standing and just talking loud, like asking a question. And then Jeff has to like talk loudly, and not everybody can maybe hear it in the back. And then, and that's how we rounded it up. But he brought the house down and took the power out with it. So it was a really interesting, just good end to it, and kind of funny. Thought went through my head is like, what if, I'm not from Portland. How do I escape from Portland if the power's out and the traffic signals aren't working? And the thought was like,
you drive carefully.
We drive carefully, on my off-road. So you had a good answer to a question. What was it? If Satoshi Nakamoto...
Okay. You can't say that. That's his thing. No. That's his thing for the next guest. We can't reveal that.
Your answer?
No. That's the question for the next guest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh.
That Robin is doing, or
for his next guest, he asks his last guest. What's a question for the next guest that you don't even know?
Oh, okay. I won't go there.
So that's super secret.
Okay,
we can't reveal that.
It's a secret. Tune into Robin Seyr's next episode, where he will ask the next guest a question
that I presented,
that Daniel came up with.
After that, we can talk about it because it's deeper than people think.
Yes,
I think.
Daniel asked me this question, and I'm like, "Is this a trick question?" Because
yes, it is.
I had an easy answer for it. And maybe I'm wrong. So
I don't know. There's no wrong answer. I think it's what it reminded me of is Donald Trump had some guy come into his office, and he said, and the guy was admiring something on the wall. I said, "Yeah, pick anything in here. You can take it. It's yours." And I remember thinking, like, that's a test, 100%. They go,
sure.
What kind of person are you?
Sure.
And my 100% answer is like, no thanks. I don't want anything.
There you go.
Well, you'll see.
Yeah. You'll find out in the next episode, folks.
All right.
So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thanks for joining us here. We're at Liberty Tapworks. This is Bitcoin Liberty Live, episode 5. Thanks for joining us, folks. See you next time.
Toodles.